For years, Donald Trump sold himself as the ultimate ally of business. Low taxes, fewer rules, Wall Street-friendly instincts. But now, something has shifted. In recent days, Trump hasn't attacked Democrats. He hasn't focused on foreign adversaries. He's gone after credit card companies, institutional investors, and the very corporate forces his own party has spent decades protecting. Capping credit card interest at 10%, blocking big investors from buying single-family homes, pushing regulators to lower borrowing costs, even opening an investigation that rattles the Federal Reserve. On the surface, this looks like economic populism, a president fighting for affordability, for everyday Americans. But look closer and you'll see a deeper conflict unfolding. Because Trump isn't just challenging Wall Street, he's challenging his own party. And here's the uncomfortable question you should be asking yourself. Is this an economic strategy or a political performance? If you want to understand where this leads, stay with me. Because to grasp what's happening now, we need to understand what problem Trump is really trying to solve. To understand this moment, we have to strip away the noise and define the real problem. Trump is heading toward a midterm election season with one vulnerability he cannot afford: economic credibility. After weeks dominated by foreign policy, affordability has pushed its way back to the center of American politics. Housing, credit, daily costs. These are not abstract issues, they are lived experiences. Trump's response has been dramatic, a burst of populist ideas aimed squarely at corporate America. But here's the tension. Most of these proposals require Congress, and Congress is controlled by a Republican Party that has spent years defending deregulation, Wall Street, and market orthodoxy. That creates a structural contradiction. Trump wants to campaign as an outsider fighting powerful economic interests. His party wants to legislate as insiders protecting them. So this is no longer just about policy. It's about control, over narrative, over priorities, over who defines what the Republican Party stands for in 2026. To see why this clash was almost inevitable, we need to step back and look at how Trump's economic instincts were shaped in the first place. To understand where this instinct comes from, we need context, political and historical. Trump has always governed with a split economic identity. On one hand, he embraced classic Republican tools, tax cuts, deregulation, and a friendly posture toward capital. On the other, he built his political brand by rejecting elite consensus and attacking institutions Americans associate with unfairness. That tension never disappeared. It was merely managed. Now, as midterms approach and affordability dominates voter anxiety, that balance is breaking down. Trump's advisors are pushing him toward kitchen table economics, housing costs, credit card debt, inflation multipliers, issues that poll well, issues that cut across ideology. But the Republican Party he leads today is not the party of insurgency. It's a governing majority with deep ties to finance, banking, and corporate America. Its reflex is legislative caution, not disruption. So when Trump floats aggressive ideas without legislative groundwork, it isn't accidental. It reflects a deeper shift from governing through Congress to governing through confrontation and message. And that sets the stage for the first real rupture, the moment when theory collides with institutional reality. Then came the collision. Trump's proposals didn't land gently on Capitol Hill. They landed like a shockwave. Republican lawmakers in the House and the Senate weren't just skeptical, many were blindsided. Credit card interest caps, housing restrictions, ideas that would require detailed legislation floated without warning, without coordination, without a plan to move them through Congress. And the pushback was unusually public. House Speaker Mike Johnson dismissed the interest rate cap as something Trump had probably not thought through. Senate Majority Leader John Thune echoed Wall Street's warning. Cap rates too tightly and credit dries up. Behind closed doors, some Republicans were even more blunt, calling the proposals ridiculous and choosing to simply look the other way. This was the first mini-crisis, not because a bill failed, but because a truth surfaced. Trump was governing without his party. One Republican summed it up coldly: "Let him say whatever he wants." That sentence matters because it reveals a quiet calculation: messaging over substance, politics over policy. If this resonates so far, take a moment to think about why this kind of disconnect keeps happening in modern politics. And hold that thought, because the real story isn't the rebellion you can see. It's the system underneath that makes this clash inevitable. What you're seeing is not chaos. It's a system revealing itself. At the center of this moment is a structural reality. Trump's power no longer flows primarily through legislation. It flows through attention, through narrative, through pressure. He doesn't need Congress to pass a bill to shape the debate. He needs them to react. By attacking credit card companies, institutional investors, and even the Federal Reserve, Trump is forcing a choice onto his party: defend Wall Street or explain why you're not on the side of voters struggling with costs. That tension is the mechanism. And notice what's missing. There's no detailed legislative roadmap, no coalition building, no sequencing. That's not an oversight. It's the strategy. Because in today's politics, signaling can matter more than success. A tweet can move markets faster than a markup session. A proposal can shift public perception without ever becoming law. This is governance by confrontation, by spotlight, by conflict. And once you see it that way, the next escalation becomes obvious. Because when pressure alone stops working, the system looks for a second crisis: louder, sharper, harder to ignore. The second rupture didn't come from Congress. It came from the institution that sits above daily politics, the Federal Reserve. When Trump's Justice Department opened a perjury investigation into Fed Chair Jerome Powell after he refused to slash interest rates, it sent a different kind of shock through Washington. This wasn't about housing or credit cards anymore. This was about power boundary. For decades, both parties treated the Fed's independence as sacred, imperfect, frustrating, but untouchable. Trump crossed that line anyway. Republicans didn't just hesitate. Some openly rebelled. They warned that the investigation could stall confirmation of a future Fed chair. They worried about markets, about precedent, about what happens when monetary policy becomes a campaign weapon. The tension escalated fast. Wall Street panicked. Banking lobbyists whispered that a single Trump tweet now carried more weight than 1,000 staff meetings. Meanwhile, GOP leaders rushed to change the subject, back to tax cuts, deregulation, and legislation already passed. This was the second mini-crisis because it exposed something raw. Trump was willing to destabilize institutions to maintain political momentum, even if his own party flinched. And that brings us closer to the most important question of all. What does this mean for you? And this is where the story stops being abstract. Because while Washington argues about process and precedent, you feel the consequences every day. You feel it when your credit card balance grows faster than your paycheck, when housing feels permanently out of reach, when interest rates decide your future more than your effort does. Trump's proposals speak directly to that frustration, not because they're detailed, not because they're guaranteed to pass, but because they name an enemy you already sense exists: powerful systems that seem designed without you in mind. That's why this messaging works. It tells you someone is fighting. But here's the hard truth. If these ideas never become law, your life doesn't materially change. The fees remain, the prices stay high, the system keeps moving. What changes instead is alignment, who you believe understands your struggle. And politics today runs on that emotional economy. So pause for a moment and ask yourself, do you want leaders who talk your pain, or ones who quietly fix it? If this question feels uncomfortably personal, that's not an accident, because the final act of this story doesn't stay inside America's borders. What's happening here doesn't stop at US households or Capitol Hill. It ripples outward. When an American president attacks Wall Street, questions the Federal Reserve, and flirts with price controls, the world pays attention. Not because these policies are new, but because the United States sits at the center of the global financial system. Markets abroad react to signals, not legislation. Allies wonder whether US economic policy is becoming less predictable. Rivals watch closely, looking for signs of internal division. A challenge to Fed independence raises borrowing costs globally. Pressure on credit markets affects capital flows far beyond America. And when populist economics collides with deregulation rhetoric, it creates uncertainty, the one thing global markets fear most. Even Trump's allies sense it. That's why GOP leaders rush to reassure investors, emphasizing tax cuts already passed and bipartisan housing packages still moving quietly through Congress. Meanwhile, Democrats remain skeptical, arguing that talk without coalition building changes nothing. So the paradox becomes global. Trump's words calm some voters at home while unsettling systems abroad. And once uncertainty spreads, the question is no longer what Trump wants. It's what happens next, when this strategy meets the future. Because the final outcome depends on which path the system chooses to follow. From here, the future splits, not into certainty, but into three possible paths. The first is the optimistic scenario. Trump's pressure works. Republicans absorb the message, refine the proposals, and selectively legislate. Maybe not sweeping caps, but targeted reforms, credit competition, housing supply measures, symbolic wins that become real. In this version, populism evolves into policy. The second path is the most likely. Nothing passes. Not because ideas are bad, but because incentives don't align. Trump continues to talk. Congress continues to legislate elsewhere. Voters hear the fight, not the outcome. Politics becomes performance, and performance is enough to win elections. Then there's the darkest scenario. Institutions weaken under constant pressure. The Fed's independence erodes. Markets lose trust. Uncertainty hardens into instability. Populism stops being a message and becomes a governing principle without guardrails. Here's the deeper truth. Systems don't break all at once. They bend, they adapt, they normalize behavior that once felt unthinkable. And that's the bridge to the end of this story. Because whether you see Trump as a disruptor or a danger, the real lesson isn't about him. It's about the kind of politics we are slowly learning to accept. This moment tells us something profound about modern power. Donald Trump may never pass most of the ideas he's floating right now. Credit card caps may stall. Housing restrictions may fade. Investigations may go nowhere. And yet, politically, that might not matter at all. Because in today's system, visibility is leverage. Attention is authority, and conflict is currency. By challenging Wall Street, even rhetorically, Trump reshapes what his party must explain, defend, or distance itself from. He forces Republicans into an uncomfortable spotlight. He reframes economic anxiety as a political weapon. The danger isn't that populist ideas fail. It's that failure no longer carries a cost. When politics becomes a series of signals instead of solutions, accountability thins. Voters are asked to choose sides in a story, not measure results. So here's the question I'll leave you with. As elections approach, will Americans reward leaders who deliver change or those who perform resistance? Because the answer won't just decide Trump's strategy, it will define the future of American democracy itself. If you want to keep thinking through how power is really changing in this country, Stay with me. The next chapter has already begun.